All right, so a lot of you who watch my videos have been asking why I've been wearing both of these devices for the last 4 months. So this is a Garmin Fenix 7X Pro Sapphire Solar, and this is a Whoop 4.0. Now there's a bunch of stuff the Garmin does that the Whoop can't do, but what they both do is track a variety of health statistics that you can use to help you in your performance, recovery, and sleep optimization. Now, I've already done a deep dive on this watch and posted my review. So if you're interested in a highly detailed analysis of just this watch alone, you can go watch that right here. Now, I have a very intense upgrade to my training on the way. After looking around at all of the kind of like performance-based options that are out there for hunters, and looking into what kind of exercise modalities they were recommending and what their programs looked like, and comparing that to the very latest in research in endurance sports, I realized that the hunting industry is lagging far behind. So I'm working on a behind-the-scenes project to fix that. But in order to do that, I needed to get highly detailed tracking data about my own performance, recovery, and sleep. And so I needed to know if the Garmin was going to be enough for that, or if there was a significant advantage in adding a dedicated fitness tracker like the Whoop. I also want to say, while this review is going to be useful for anybody looking to track their training, it's going to be specifically useful for hunters and mountain athletes, because I'm going to cover things that came up with both of these devices in the backcountry that I haven't seen a lot of other reviewers touch on, because they rarely leave cell service or they rarely try and use a device for 10 to 12 days straight. So for this particular review, I looked at 14 different categories across 2 different classes. So the descriptive class is made up of price, battery, bands, display, weather resistance, GPS, and app integration. And the tracking class is made up of sensors, sensitivity, performance, health, sleep, hunt performance, and training performance. And as usual, I used a forced ranking scoring system. So the best device in each category gets a 1, the worst device in each category gets a 2, and at the end, the device with the lowest score wins. Now, before we dive into the data, I have a quick announcement about Mindful Hunter outfitting. I will release a much more detailed video about this in the next couple weeks, but for now, I'm gonna keep it short and sweet. So I have acquired a new hunting territory in British Columbia. It's 3,000 square kilometers. I will be doing all my bear hunts out of there this year. I now also offer alpine mule deer hunts and alpine goat hunts. I have very limited offerings for goat and mule deer this year that I'm offering at a discount. And I still have 2 spots for black bear this year that I'm offering at a discount. If any of that interests you, send me an email at j@mindfulhunter.com and I'll get you pricings, dates, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, in the next couple weeks, once I get caught up on everything and all the dust is settled, I will be releasing a much more detailed video with all of the details. So let's move on to the price category. So this review is specifically looking at the Garmin Fenix 7X. So the price for that right now, because it's last year's model, is only $600 USD. Now the price for the Whoop, if you just go on a month-to-month subscription, is $30 a month. But if you sign up for a year, it drops it all the way down to $225 USD for the year. So I'm gonna give Garmin the edge on this, because after about 3 years, you would have paid off the Garmin, and the Garmin is gonna last you much longer than 3 years. So in the long run, the Garmin is the more affordable device. Now, if you were to get the most recent version of the Garmin, it's actually retailing for $1,100. So you would need to use that watch for 6 years straight in order for it to cover what a subscription to the Whoop would cost. And at that point, I think the cost savings kind of nullify each other. However, because the Garmin does so much more, and it's not just a fitness tracker, obviously the overall budget option here is the Garmin watch for sure. And my pro tip is always buy last year's model. They mark it down significantly, and it's rare that the 1-year upgrade does anything that much better. Battery goes to Garmin as well. I've found in my testing, you get about 20 days out of the Solar watch if you don't track your activities too closely and you don't use the GPS. So basically, if you turn on sensitive tracking for a hike that you want to track, or if you use the GPS while you're in the backcountry, it will munch battery power. Like I think if you just turn GPS on and leave it, you'll get maybe 70 or 80 hours total out of the watch. But if you keep the highly sensitive tracking to a minimum, you can get 20, 21 days out of a single charge with the addition of the solar. Now, the Whoop, on the other hand, only lasts you about 5 days, and then you need to recharge it. So if you're gonna go into the backcountry on a hunt that's any longer than 5 days, you have to bring the additional battery. And the way the Whoop works is it has this battery here that has a USB-C plug on it. You plug in this battery, you charge it, and then you put it on your watch. It takes about 3 to 4 hours for it to fully drain into the actual part that's attached to your wrist. And then you can take this battery off and go store it. So what I do when I go on a backcountry hunt is I will charge this fully, put it in with the rest of my batteries, and then halfway through the hunt, slap it on my watch for half a day, and then once it's drained, stick it back into my battery pouch. Now, some people love that because you never have to take the Whoop off your wrist. It's literally calculating data all day, every day. I find it a little bit annoying because what happens is I will take this battery, I'll put it on my wrist, and then I go about my day and I forget that it's on there. And then when I finally remember to take it off, I'll like set it beside my computer or set it in the washroom or do something. And then 5 days later, when I realize I need to charge up my Whoop again, I'm like, where did I put that bloody thing? Now, I'm not gonna mark down Whoop for that because that's more a function of my own behaviors and habits, but I just wanted to pass that on. For me, the other thing that it takes a long time because it's wireless based charging, it takes a long time for the juice to move from the battery pack into the Whoop. I would much rather there was just a USB-C attachment in here and I could just take my Whoop off for half an hour and quick charge it. It would make it simpler for me, but that's just my own personal preference. The all-important bands. I gotta give this one to Garmin. This Whoop band is trash. I used to have the Whoop 3.0 before this, maybe probably 4 or 5 years ago. I preferred it. There's like a weird amount of stretch. Like it doesn't stretch that much. And then when it gets tight, it doesn't tighten all the way. So it's like halfway between a stretchy band and a not stretchy band. And with both of these devices, the ideal location to wear it is directly above your wrist bone. That is where you tend to get the most accurate readings, and that's where it's recommended to wear these. So I believe the reason for that is when you wear them lower, they can actually become elevated by the wrist bone here, and then it doesn't come in contact with your skin and you don't get the most accurate readings. So they suggest that you wear them up above that bone in your wrist. The problem is there's not that much tension in this thing. It's hard to get just the right tightness in it, and it tends to slide around a bit. The Garmin band I really like. I normally leave it a little bit loose. It doesn't get caught in any of my arm hair. I can slide it up until there's a bit of tension there. And then if it's been sitting there for a couple hours and I feel my hand kind of getting sticky, I can just kind of slide it around and there's a little bit of room to breathe in there. So for me, I much prefer the Garmin band to the Whoop band. Well, obviously Garmin is going to win the display category because one of the major drawbacks to the Whoop is that there is no real-time data viewing options. The Whoop is useless without your smartphone. You can't see any of the data, you can't interact with it, there's no buttons. On one hand, it's kind of cool because it's this ultra minimal device. On the other hand, it's kind of a pain in the butt because without your phone, you can't access any of the data. Now, the display on the Garmin, I think it's a 51 millimeter bezel. That's the biggest face they offer. You can see a ton of statistics on here. I can look at my steps going back all week. On this particular face right now, I'm looking at calories burnt today, sunrise, sunset, current elevation, current resting heart rate, how many days of battery I've got, the weather forecast for the day, the time, and how many steps I've done per day for the last 7 days in a row. So really useful to just get a quick snapshot of your week and day. Weather resistance. The Garmin is good to 10 ATM, which means you can dive with it to 100 meters. And the Whoop has an IP68 rating, which means that it has a waterproof rating for a permanent submersion up to 13 feet. So obviously the 100 meters of the Garmin is greater than the 13 feet of the Whoop, so the Garmin's gonna win this category. However, functionally speaking, both these things are bomb-proof. I wore them both on winter hunts. I wore them both swimming and in the hot tub with my kid at the community center pool. I've wore them both in the shower. I've never had an issue due to any type of weather or water in either of these devices. Again, Garmin's gonna win the GPS category hands down. It has a variety of GPS sensors in it, and the Whoop has none whatsoever. And a side note about that, if you wanna track your hikes, like if you wanna geo-reference your hikes, you have to have your phone on you because the Whoop will not take any type of altitude, elevation, or geo-reference location data that can map out your hike. Like for instance, in Strava, if you link this thing to Strava and don't have your phone on you, when you get done a hike, it will send the data to Strava and it will record the metrics of the hike, but you won't know how far you went, where you were in the world or what elevation you changed or anything like that. You will only know the time you were gone and the change in your heart rate over the course of time. On that note, let's look at app integration. So both of these have third-party app integration. So you can link them both to Strava. They both have their own, Garmin has the Garmin Connect app. The Whoop has the Whoop app. They link to those super easily. One thing to note on the new version of the Whoop, the 4.0, the old version would only hold 2 days of data. So if you left cell coverage, it would record the first day you left and the last day you got back. And you just have a blank spot in the middle. The new Whoop will record 14 days worth of data. So if you go out to the field and you have no cell coverage or Wi-Fi, you cannot access any of your data. It will store it, but just because your phone is beside it and has Bluetooth, you cannot, I think it has to be linked to the servers back at Whoop in order for it to process your data. This to me is the major failing of the Whoop as a backcountry device because you have no idea, you can't measure your strain, your recovery, your sleep, calories burned, nothing. It just sits on your wrist, records the data. When you get back into cell coverage, it will transfer all the data to your phone, process it on the Whoop servers, and then you'll be able to see your whole trip and go over the metrics. But at least the newer one will record 14 days where the old one only recorded 2 days. Now, it's kind of similar with the Garmin because the Connect app is not going to process your data either. So you won't get the more intense interpretive functions where it actually goes through and assesses your data. But at least you can look at it real time. You know how many steps you've done, you know your change in elevation, you know how many calories you've burnt that day, and you can even use the watch and kind of go back days and see your different calories. So both of them have limitations with the app, but the Garmin is much more functional without the app or without cell service. So if we look at just the descriptive class alone, the Garmin smokes the Whoop with a score of 7 and the Whoop has 14. Quick announcement before we dive into the tracking class. I have just released the 2025 apparel drop for Forged in the backcountry. So I've released brand new boxers I've designed from the ground up, a brand new waterproof hat, and added 5 new t-shirts to the collection. And for every $5 you spend on apparel, you will get 1 entry to win a Swarovski ATX 85mm spotting scope. All you need to do is go to forgedinthebackcountry.com. Let's say you add $40 worth of apparel to your shopping cart and check out. You will be given 8 entries to win that brand new spotter. Contest is live until April 30th, 2025. All the details are on my website. Okay, so let's look at sensors. Garmin wins this one pretty handily. So here's the list of Garmin sensors. GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, QZSS, Beidou, SatIQ Tech, Garmin Elevate, Pulse Hawks, blood oxygen saturation monitor, barometric altimeter, compass, gyroscope, accelerometer, thermometer, ambient light sensor, and depth sensor. So it literally has a laundry list of things that it's constantly recording. When we move over to the Whoop, we only have 4 sensors. We have an optical heart rate sensor, a thermometer, a blood oxygen saturation sensor, and an accelerometer. So the one thing to note, there has been a major upgrade in the heart rate sensor of the Whoop 4.0 compared to the 3.0. And we're gonna get into kind of my data tracking and my conclusions regarding the quality of both of these sensors in a minute, but the Whoop heart rate sensor is definitely more accurate than the Garmin. So while that category told us how many sensors and what they are, almost more importantly is the sensitivity of those sensors. In my initial review of the Garmin, one of my major issues that I had was the lack of sensitivity in data tracking when it's not in some type of activity mode. So if you don't tell it to start tracking your hiking, or if you don't tell it, I'm on a treadmill, I want you to track my cardio, it's not very accurate at all. Like, I have been hiking with a heart rate of like 170 BPM, and this thing will think I'm at like 75 because I think it only looks like every 5 or 10 minutes. And it does that in order to conserve battery power. So the benefit is you get a longer lasting battery. The deficit is you get a really low performing sensitivity of these sensors. The Whoop has far better background tracking capacities, and we're gonna get into that later on. Moving on to the performance tracking capabilities. So if we actually turn on, a hiking activity in the Garmin and a hiking activity in the Whoop to tell both devices, I want you to pay as much attention as possible, the Whoop still outperforms the Garmin. Now here's the thing, the Garmin will give you a more comprehensive appraisal of your hike. It will be able to tell you things like the barometric pressure while you were out there, it has the compass, it has the elevation capabilities. But if we're looking from a purely performance perspective, like which device is monitoring my caloric output and the amount of effort I exerted while on that hike, the Whoop is the superior device. And again, I've had these for the last 4 months. I've monitored my hikes on both of them. And the Whoop is just much better at accurately capturing the data. I think the sensors are better on the back. I think it's taking readings more often. I think it does a better job of interpolating any gaps where it wasn't able to get readings. Just overall, it's much more accurate at tracking even when in performance mode. Now, if we look at overall health tracking, and I use this category to basically say background tracking. So the reason I got the Garmin in the first place is that I just wanted something on my wrist that was going to be tracking my health data throughout the day. How many calories am I burning? How many steps am I doing? What's my overall state? Am I draining myself throughout the day? Am I recovering in this day? And again, the Whoop smashes the Garmin in this regard. It's just way more accurate, takes way more readings, and you get much more detailed data at the end of the day. The only category where the Garmin is better than the Whoop is in the steps category. Whoop has a tendency to overestimate your steps, but it's a vanity metric. It doesn't actually go into the strain score, which we're going to get into in a minute, that the Whoop puts out. So while the steps can look overinflated to a degree, it's not actually impacting its estimation of your overall effort or caloric expenditure for the day. Moving on to sleep, yet again, Whoop smashes the Garmin. More accurate, more sensitive, takes more readings, and you get a much more accurate assessment of your sleep. It breaks it down into categories better. I think the sleep coach is better on the Whoop, and just again, overall, more sensitive, more accurate than the Garmin. So the last two classes I want to touch on are hunt performance and training performance. So basically what I did is I had both devices on my wrist for a hunt. And now for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna look at one specific day during that hunt, and we're gonna compare the quality of the data recorded by both devices. Okay, so here we are looking at Tuesday, January the 14th. This was the day I hiked into a winter goat hunt. You can see the sleep score I got for the day was 67. My heart rate ranged from 51 beats per minute to 176 beats per minute. My body battery started at plus 50, and during the day I drained 60, so I was left at minus 10, and my overall stress level was 43, with the steps accumulated throughout the day of 5,277. Now, here is the issue with the Garmin. If we go into the body battery, you can see here between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m., those little white lines underneath means that it was unmeasurable activity. And what I've noticed with the Garmin, especially on hunts, depending on what you're doing with your arms, depending on how sweaty your arms are, depending on the placement of the watch, it will just have these big gaps where it's not recording any data. And I think it does its best to interpret what the, metrics might have been during that time, but we literally have an 8-hour period where the Garmin just stopped gathering data. And then we have this other period from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. where it has me in this incredibly high stress zone. I went to bed at 9:30 that night. So I don't know what was going on with my watch that it thought I was going through an incredibly high amount of stress when I was actually sleeping. So, in my opinion, relatively poor performance from the Garmin at being a background activity tracker throughout the day on a backcountry hunt. Now, if we take the same day and we go and look at the Whoop, we can see here I had a strain of 20.7. We'll get into that metric in a moment. Sleep performance of 66%, HRV of 67, and a 61% recovery. You'll also notice that it automatically tracked some activities. Like from noon to 1, it thinks I was cross-country skiing, and from 1:15 to 6:30 p.m., it thought I was doing some kind of aerobics activity. This is just me snowshoeing, but the Whoop is doing its best to interpret what activity I might have been doing. Then, if we go down to the dashboard, we can see here that my steps, it's estimating at 28,667. Now the Garmin had me at 5,077. I know I hiked somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 miles, but again, it's a bit of a vanity metric. It's just guessing at your steps. It's not using it to calculate your actual strain. So it's giving me a very clear output of my calories burned, which is 6,040. I went back at the Garmin and looked. It thought I only burned 4,800 calories. I know from past hunting adventures, that seems very low to me. It was an incredibly high intensity activity day. And if we go down here to the stress monitor, you're gonna notice it's tracking the whole time. There's no gaps in tracking like there is with the Garmin. It also shows me my strain and recovery on a day basis across the week here at the bottom. And then if we go over to the strain thing at the end, so 21 is the highest strain score you can get on a Whoop. And I'll explain strain score in a moment. So you can tell at 20.7, this is extreme exertion over the course of the day. And then it will break down, strain statistics over the last 7 days, average heart rate over the last 7 days, average caloric expenditure over the last 7 days. It also tells me the heart rate zones that I was operating in. Now you can get all of this information out of the Garmin is better, but the Whoop is a much better interface. Like it's a Garmin in general has crap user interfaces for almost all of their products. I don't know why. They need to steal an engineer from Apple or a designer from Apple or something, because it's shocking how bad the user interfaces are. Like trying to get around on this watch is like a labyrinth. You get lost in the menus. It's brutal. The Whoop app is way better, much more usable. The data kind of leaps right out at you and makes sense right away. But if we're just to simplify all of this, the hunt tracking, like just the ability of each device to track your effort and caloric expenditure over the course of a day just sitting on your wrist, the Whoop smashes the Garmin hands down. We're now looking at a hike, one of my training hikes that I did. So it gave me an activity strain of 14.5 for the activity, 6,800 steps, breaks it down, tells me how long I was in each heart rate zone, tells me how many calories I burnt, my average heart rate, my max heart rate. And then because I had my phone on me, it also gives me a map. So great tracking and output for an individual activity. Now, if we go over to the Connect app and we open the hiking app on here, again, the Garmin has a lot more data. Like if we go into the stats section here, it's recording a lot of stuff like pace, training effect, cadence, elevation, nutrition, hydration, all that kind of stuff. But again, the issue with the Garmin is the fact that it sometimes just has these gaps in recording data, and it doesn't do as good of a job of assimilating all the data and giving you a clear, coherent output that you can use moving forward. So now if we go back and look at the tracking totals, we kind of get the opposite story that we got with the descriptive total. The Whoop smashes the Garmin with a score of 8, and the Garmin has a score of 13. And if we move into the final scores, Garmin slightly edges out the Whoop with a score of 20, and the Whoop gets a score of 22. But remember, there's a lot of categories in here that weren't necessarily reflective of fitness tracking alone. I think if you really want to put them head to head as fitness trackers, you look at that second section that was focused on tracking, and it's pretty clear that the Whoop is the superior fitness tracker to the Garmin. The question is there enough of a difference to make it worth it wearing both? Like it seems a little bit ridiculous. So is the Garmin good enough? And if it is, who is it good enough for and who's it not good enough for? Now, I'll be honest, when I started to put all the data for this review together, I'd worn both these devices for the last 4 months. I felt very strongly that the Garmin alone was going to be good enough. However, once I started diving into the details of the data, seeing these gaps in measurements, and just really some of the failings of the Garmin, especially at background data tracking, I've changed my mind completely. I think if you are somebody who is hyper compulsive about performance tracking, recovery tracking, sleep tracking, all that kind of stuff, like if you're about to engage in a really detailed training program with different blocks and all that kind of stuff, I think you have to have a more detailed tracking capability than the Garmin offers you. And that's where something like the Whoop steps in. And again, if you're a hunter and you're into the backcountry, the Whoop alone is not going to be good enough because you're going to need things like GPS capabilities, the real-time screen, all that kind of stuff that the Garmin offers. So essentially, for those people who are really far out on the edge, you do need both. I think there is an argument to be made to wear both of these. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, and when you put them together, you really have a comprehensive suite of services at your disposal. Now, if you just want to track some hikes and you need to be able to take GPS location every now and then and you're not super anal, the Garmin does a great job. And just like when you're setting up a profile in a rangefinder and after you true your dope, the same thing goes for the Garmin. I would say that on average, it is underestimating your caloric output and your effort each day, somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the type of activities you're doing. So just know that. If it says you burnt 5,000 calories, you're probably closer to 6,000. So I can also say this. If you need access to real-time data, you have to have something with a display, so the Garmin is going to take the heads up. And if you want highly detailed background tracking, you're going to have to get the Whoop because the Garmin fails in that capacity. And like I mentioned before, if you're hyper OCD like me, you're probably going to want to wear both. All right, there you have it. That was a ton of information to go over. I'm sure there's going to be more questions. I could have gotten way more detailed on several of those categories. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comments section below. I'd love to hear about what your experience has been like with these devices or other similar devices. Are there other fitness trackers that you would like to see me look at moving forward? Did you appreciate this review? Do you find unbiased, non-sponsored gear reviews beneficial? I am not financially incentivized by any brands whatsoever, which means the only thing I care about is delivering objective reviews to you the end user. If you find that useful and you want to support me in that endeavor, go to mindful-reviews.com and sign up for a subscription today. I'll even sweeten the pot. Anyone who joins between now and April 30th, 2025 will be automatically entered to win a pair of Sig Sauer Zulu 10 15 power binoculars. Again, that's mindful-reviews.com. And as always, thank you for tuning in.